Will Graham's gift was a double-edged sword that cut deeper with each use. When he looked at a crime scene, he didn't just observe the evidence. He experienced the killer's thoughts, emotions, and motivations as if they were his own. It was like watching a film in reverse, every frame etched into his consciousness with painful clarity. Each time he stepped into a killer's mind, it left another crack in his psychological armor, another shadow in his increasingly fragile psyche. The price of his extraordinary empathy was paid in pieces of his sanity, fragments of self that disappeared into the darkness he confronted daily. FBI Special Agent Jack Crawford understood the unique value of Will's ability better than anyone. As head of the Behavioral Science Unit, he had seen countless profilers come and go, but none like Will. When a series of particularly grotesque murders began terrorizing the Baltimore area, Crawford knew he needed Will's insight. The victims were being transformed into macabre works of art, their bodies arranged in poses that spoke of both violence and grace. Yet he couldn't ignore the toll each case took on the gifted profiler. Will's hands would shake after examining crime scenes, and his eyes would take on a haunted look that lingered for days, sometimes weeks. The brilliant light of his insight seemed to dim a little more with each investigation, as if the darkness he confronted was slowly consuming him from within. Seeking to protect his most valuable asset, Crawford made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He enlisted renowned psychiatrist Dr. Hannibal Lecter to monitor Will's mental stability. Behind Hannibal Lecter's perfectly tailored suits and impeccable manners lurked a predator of unprecedented sophistication. He wasn't just a killer, he was an artist who saw murder as his medium, death as his palette. Each victim was carefully selected, transformed through death into a macabre masterpiece that spoke to themes of power, beauty, and the inherent savagery of human nature. But Hannibal's most twisted signature was his practice of harvesting choice cuts from his victims, which he would transform into elaborate gourmet meals. These he served at his legendary dinner parties, taking perverse pleasure in watching Baltimore's elite unknowingly participate in his ritualistic cannibalism. Each perfectly plated dish was a private joke, a mockery of societal conventions that thrilled him to his core. The regular sessions between Will and Hannibal began innocently enough in the psychiatrist's elegant office. They would sit across from each other, surrounded by carefully curated artwork and leather-bound books, discussing Will's cases and his psychological responses to them. The room itself seemed designed to create an atmosphere of refined intellectual discourse, with its dark wood panels and strategic lighting that cast subtle shadows across antique furniture. But beneath this civilized veneer, Hannibal saw something in Will that fascinated him, a capacity for darkness that mirrored his own. Like a master manipulator conducting a symphony of destruction, Hannibal began orchestrating Will's psychological unraveling with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a spider. "Tell me about your dreams, Will," Hannibal would say, his maroon eyes studying every micro-expression that crossed Will's face. The way Will's fingers would twitch, how his gaze would dart around the room, seeking escape from memories that haunted him. These were all notes in Hannibal's composition. Will spoke of a recurring vision that haunted both his sleeping and waking hours. A massive black stag with feathers like a raven's, its antlers reaching toward him like grasping fingers. The creature's eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and its presence in his dreams carried a weight of significance that he couldn't quite grasp. The stag was Will's subconscious trying to warn him about the predator sitting across from him. But this realization would come far too late. As the weeks progressed, Will's grip on reality began to slip like sand through his fingers. He experienced increasingly frequent episodes of dissociation, losing hours or even entire days to the void of his fractured consciousness. The boundaries between wakefulness and dreams became fluid, reality bleeding into nightmare and back again with frightening ease. The feathered stag appeared with growing frequency, its hooves leaving tracks in places where no animal could possibly be. Will's hands developed a persistent tremor, and his mind felt like it was wrapped in gauze, everything slightly muffled and distorted, as if he were experiencing life through a veil of static. Hannibal observed Will's deterioration with clinical fascination and artistic appreciation. Each time Will successfully profiled a killer, connecting the dots that others couldn't see, Hannibal would respond by creating an even more elaborate tableau of death. He arranged bodies like Renaissance sculptures, each pose and detail carefully considered to convey specific meanings. These weren't just murders, they were messages meant for Will, tests of his ability to truly see and understand Hannibal's design. The doctor took particular pleasure in watching Will decode these messages during their sessions, noting how each revelation pushed him further toward the edge of sanity. The changes in Will didn't go unnoticed by those around him. Dr. Alana Bloom, a psychiatrist who had long harbored feelings for Will, watched with growing concern as his behavior became increasingly erratic. She saw the brilliant, sensitive man she cared for disappearing into something darker and less stable. His usual social awkwardness gave way to something more profound, a disconnection from reality that manifested in sudden outbursts of confusion and paranoia. Freddie Lowndes, an ambitious crime blogger, always hunting for her next sensational story, began publishing articles questioning Will's mental state and suggesting he might be more dangerous than the killers he hunted. Her lurid articles painted him as a ticking time bomb, a man whose gift for understanding killers might be more than just professional insight. Jack Crawford found himself in an impossible position. His most effective tool in catching killers was showing signs of breaking, but the murders continued, each more horrific than the last. He watched helplessly as Will's insights became more brilliant but also more disturbing, as if he was not just understanding the killers, but becoming intimate with their darkness. The strain of balancing his responsibility to catch killers with his duty to protect his people wore on Crawford, etching new lines in his face and adding weight to his shoulders. Will's perception of reality continued to fragment, like a mirror dropping onto concrete. He would find himself standing in strange places with no memory of how he got there, his clothes soaked with sweat and his mind racing with images he couldn't quite grasp. The feathered stag became his constant companion, its hooves echoing on floors that should have muffled them, its breath visible in warm rooms. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting without warning, leaving him increasingly uncertain about the sequence of events in his own life. During one particularly intense session, Will confessed to Hannibal, his voice trembling with the weight of his revelation, "I don't know who I am anymore. The lines between myself and the killers, they're blurring. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. It's like I'm becoming a stranger to myself." Hannibal savored these moments of vulnerability, knowing that each confession brought Will closer to the transformation he envisioned. He would respond with carefully crafted insights that seemed to offer clarity, but actually pushed Will further into confusion. The string of murders attributed to the Chesapeake Ripper grew more elaborate and artistic, each scene more shocking than the last. Every crime scene was a carefully composed nightmare, bodies transformed into grotesque sculptures that spoke of power, beauty, and destruction. The victims were arranged in positions that mimicked classical art, their death poses telling stories that only the most culturally sophisticated would understand. No one suspected that the Ripper was sitting in his elegant office each week, sipping wine and guiding Will Graham deeper into madness while discussing these very murders with professional detachment. As Will's mind continued to fracture, small details began to coalesce into disturbing patterns. He noticed the way Hannibal's nostrils would flare slightly when discussing certain murders, as if savoring a pleasant memory. The elaborate meals Hannibal served began to take on new significance, each dish suddenly suspect in its exotic preparation and presentation. Will started to recognize the predatory grace that lurked beneath Hannibal's cultivated exterior, the way he moved like a creature, wearing human skin as a carefully tailored suit. The cost of these revelations was devastating to Will's psyche. Understanding Hannibal meant understanding something dark and terrible about himself, the part of him that could appreciate the artistry in death, the beauty in destruction. He realized that Hannibal hadn't just been observing him, he had been cultivating Will's own capacity for darkness, nurturing the shadow self that had always lurked beneath his empathy. This understanding came with a terrible price. The knowledge that he wasn't just capable of understanding monsters, he was capable of becoming one. The web of destruction around them grew wider, drawing in everyone who came too close. Alana found herself drawn into Hannibal's orbit, unable to see the danger behind his charm and sophistication. Her professional respect for him blinded her to the predator hiding behind the person's suit. Jack Crawford's suspicions about Hannibal grew, but each attempt to investigate him led to dead ends and more questions. The doctor's carefully constructed facade was impenetrable to those who weren't willing to look into the darkness as deeply as Will had. Freddie Lowndes continued her relentless pursuit of the story, unaware that each article brought her closer to becoming part of it. Her sensational blog posts about Will's mental state and the FBI's failures only served to add another layer of complexity to Hannibal's game. She became another piece on the chessboard, her actions predictable and useful to Hannibal's greater design. The psychological chess game between Will and Hannibal reached new levels of complexity. Hannibal recognized that Will was beginning to see him clearly, but this didn't concern him. In fact, it delighted him. He had always wanted an equal, someone who could truly appreciate his work. In Will, he saw the potential for a partner who could understand the beauty in his brutality, who could appreciate the artistry of his kills, not just as an observer, but as a participant. Will's mind became a battleground between his natural empathy and the darkness Hannibal had nurtured within him. His moral compass, once so clear, began to spin wildly, unable to find true north in a world where good and evil had become hopelessly entangled. He found himself appreciating the artistic elements of the Ripper's kills, understanding the messages encoded in the arrangements of blood and bone. This understanding both horrified and thrilled him, creating a cognitive dissonance that threatened to tear his mind apart. Each interaction between them became laden with double meanings and hidden threats, their conversations elaborate dances around the truth. Both men were aware that the other knew, but neither was ready to shatter the delicate facade they had constructed. Their sessions became a form of psychological warfare, each word carefully chosen, each gesture calculated for maximum impact. Hannibal continued to push Will toward embracing his darker nature, while Will struggled to maintain his grip on his former self. The feathered stag, Will's constant companion throughout his descent into darkness, took on new significance. He realized it wasn't just a manifestation of his fractured psyche, it was a representation of Hannibal's influence on him. The way the doctor had stalked through his mind, leaving tracks that could never be erased. The creature became both a warning and a guide, leading him toward a truth he both feared and desired to understand. Everything led to an inevitable confrontation where Will had to face not just Hannibal, but himself. The choice before him wasn't simply between stopping a killer and letting him go. It was between rejecting or embracing the darkness that had grown within him. The stag watched from the shadows as Will faced this ultimate decision, its presence a reminder of how far he had come and how much he had changed. The truth, when it finally emerged fully into the light, was as beautiful as it was terrible. Hannibal's carefully constructed person suit fell away, revealing the creature that had always lurked beneath. But Will had changed too, transformed by his journey through the darkness. He could no longer pretend to be the same person who had started this investigation, could no longer maintain the fiction of pure righteousness that had once defined his work with the FBI. What Will discovered was a truth more devastating than any crime scene he had ever analyzed. The line between hunter and hunted, between good and evil, was far more permeable than he had ever imagined. Hannibal hadn't just changed Will's mind, he had fundamentally altered his soul, showing him that darkness and light could exist simultaneously within the same person, that the capacity for creation and destruction were two sides of the same coin. Their story became a cautionary tale about the price of understanding evil too well. The black stag that had haunted Will's dreams was finally revealed for what it truly was, the embodiment of his connection to Hannibal, the physical manifestation of how deeply the doctor had worked his way into Will's psyche. It was a symbol of the transformation that had occurred within him, a change that could never be undone. In the end, Will learned that some knowledge comes at an irreversible cost. By opening his mind to understand a monster, he had allowed that monster to reshape him from within. The darkness Hannibal had cultivated would always be part of him now, a shadow that would never fully fade, a constant reminder of how close he had come to crossing the line between understanding evil and becoming it. His gift for empathy, once a tool for justice, had become the very thing that allowed darkness to take root in his soul. As the full scope of Hannibal's design became clear, Will realized that this had always been inevitable. In his pursuit of justice, he had allowed himself to be drawn into an elaborate dance with darkness, and that darkness would forever be a part of him. Like the feathered stag that had guided him through this journey, it would always be there, watching from the shadows of his mind, a testament to the price of seeing the truth too clearly. The monster he had sought to understand had not just revealed itself. It had shown him the monster that lurked within himself, waiting to be awakened by the right combination of manipulation and revelation.